Hello, this is the jury charge in literary for the 200 class. I'm going to start out with some Congressional Record. The subject is in mourning. Here we go. Mr. Speaker, last Tuesday at the age of 89, one of our former colleagues who was a strong and determined man passed away. Calvin Theodore Ted Hawthorne of Seattle, Washington will be long remembered in these chambers. Ted served as a member of the House of Representatives for more than a quarter of a century. He presided as chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. He introduced progressive civil rights legislation. He supported the Equal Rights Amendment, and he worked closely with the governor of the state of Washington to protect the coastal environment. When I first came to the House, Ted was one of the first persons that I met. He encouraged me to speak out on issues that made my blood boil. He enlisted my advice and aid on several of his pet projects. He wasn't content to sit and watch. He was aggressive, yet a good listener. Ted Hawthorne never lost his zest for living. After his retirement from the House in 2007, his political life did not stop. Ted ran for the office of City Council member in Seattle. Although he was defeated on election night, he offered his full services to the victor. Since Ted's passing, I have realized how important it is to recognize the special needs of all groups. Sometimes we are so caught up in our own problems and strategies that we overlook the needs of others whose attention is merited. Indeed, we will miss Calvin Theodore Hawthorne, but we will remember his contributions to the state of Washington and to the American people. On behalf of the members of the State of Washington delegation, I would like to extend our sincere sympathy to the family of Calvin Theodore Hawthorne. Okay, my next segment is jury instructions. Ready? The jury has returned. In response to the question from the foreman in considering the definition of assault with intent to commit murder, we will clarify wrongful act and attempt was unlawful. I am going to read to you the legislative definition of assault from the Penal Code. The Bar Review Committee has included some other words that probably created some of this confusion. Assault is an unlawful attempt coupled with a present ability to commit a violent injury upon the person of another. You can see in the printed instructions that were submitted to the jury and are made available to the jury during their deliberations, we have added to commit a wrongful act by means of physical force instead of to commit a violent injury. When you have an assault, what it really means is that you intend to strike, hit, shoot, or knife another person. In other words, you intend to commit a battery. I am not getting too historical or academic in my next comment, hopefully, but one of the cases that most law students read, and at least I read it back in the late 90s, or I read it back in the late 90s when I was attending law school, is a case from England. This is a case I guess every law student has read, which I didn't ask counsel if they covered or not, but I am sure they have. It says, if it wasn't assize time, I would run you through where a man has a sword against the stomach of another. In that particular season, he is not going to commit a violent injury upon another person, so the question is whether this is an attempt or not. Well, it was not an attempt because he didn't intend to commit a battery. Now the law is that you have to have an unlawful attempt. This means an attempt that is unjustified under the law, and of course, an unlawful attempt could be a wrongful act by means of physical force. So in speaking hypothetically, if you have an unjustified striking of another person, say not in actual defense of yourself or in actual defense of another person, then it would be considered unlawful. It is unjustified, but you can have such conduct where it is not considered unlawful under the laws of the state. These are determinations for the trier of fact to make under the evidence that is presented. Okay, I'm going to finish up the article that we've been reading, The Chocolate Wars. Here we go. Ready? By putting quality at the center of his business, Forrest was able to quickly reverse the downward spiral that had begun under the previous management. He made the chocolate coating on each bar thicker than ever. He added more peanuts and caramel to the Snickers and increased the size of the Three Musketeers. Years later, even after the success of M&M's, Forrest's zeal remained undiminished. He often would buy Mars products from retailers to check the quality. One night he purchased a packet of M&Ms at a supermarket outside of Los Angeles. Each candy bore the signature M, but in this sample some of the legs of the M's were missing. Forrest instantly telephoned the hapless product manager. He wanted me to track down the serial number and recall the batch, the man remembers, but it was 3 a.m. and I told him I wouldn't do it. He said if I didn't get out of bed right then and get down to the plant, he would fire me. So I went. Always driven, Mars wanted to be number one, and this brought him head to head with Hershey. Relations between the two companies had been friendly for years. When Frank Mars was struggling in Minneapolis, it was Hershey, or more specifically William Murray, who helped him out. When no other chocolate supplier would extend Mars credit, Murray gave him an account. Frank Mars had always viewed Hershey as a partner, but his son did not. To Forrest, the Pennsylvania giant was Mars's major competitor, and it unnerved him to have Hershey controlling any part of the operations. In 1965, Forrest announced that he was going to phase out his purchases of chocolate coating. Economically, it didn't seem feasible. Forrest could buy Hershey coating for a lot less than he could make it himself, but Mars didn't look at it in those terms. By 1966, Mars was selling $150 million worth of chocolate, while Mars's company was selling only $90 million. A few years later, under Forrest's leadership, his firm was running neck and neck with its competitor. In many ways, Hershey was a slumbering giant. During Milton Hershey's reign, the town and the company had been totally dependent on him, and when Milton died in 1945, the people who had come to rely on his generosity and vision seemed lost. They could not make a single decision without first wondering what MS would do. The rallying cry became Milton Hershey would have never, for it was easier to say what he wouldn't have done than to say what he would have done. Hershey, unlike other Fortune 500 companies, did not have a marketing department in the mid-1960s. Milton had never felt the need to formally advertise his products, and those who followed him were afraid to break with tradition. With Hershey in retreat, Mars went after the U.S. market as forcefully as it could, ordering a massive increase in advertising and promotion. The marketing blitz was backed up by the most aggressive sales force in the industry. In the fall of 1973, Mars passed Hershey for the first time and became America's #1 candy maker. And while Mars spent the 1980s conquering the world, Hershey desperately tried to reclaim its lead position in the United States. It made a fresh commitment to advertising and introduced a flurry of new products. Why? It all boils down to this basic fact: whoever controls the most shelf space wins. As any candy manufacturer will say, no one ever plans to buy a candy bar, it just happens. Candy makers count on this impulse buying for 90% of their business, so Hershey knew it had to get more products onto the shelves. Among other new offerings was one that looked very similar to M&M's, except that the candies had a peanut butter center and were produced in the same brown and orange colors of the Reese's Peanut Butter Cups wrapper. The company called them Reese's Pieces. Hershey chose to launch Reese's Pieces nationally in 1978, but after a year, sales were still lagging. Jack Dowd, the company's head of marketing, knew he would need something, some gimmick, or the product wasn't likely to survive. In October 1981, Hershey received a call from Universal Studios. It seems they were filming a new movie about a space creature that befriends a little boy. The script had called for M&Ms to be used to lure the creature out of the woods and into the boy's house, but when Universal asked Mars for permission to use M&Ms in the movie, the candy company refused. Universal hoped to use Reese's Pieces instead and wanted Hershey to promote the movie with its candy. Dowd didn't know what to think, but he was curious. He made an appointment to talk with the representatives of Universal. Steven Spielberg was directing the film the day he arrived for the meeting, so Dowd met Kathleen Kennedy, Spielberg's co-producer. She told Dowd the story of the alien who lands in California, in a California suburb, and is sheltered by a 9-year-old boy. Dowd was impressed with what he heard. Hershey agreed to back up the movie with $1 million worth of promotions, and in return, Hershey would be able to use the film for its own advertising. So I came home, Dowd said, and told the staff that we were going to spend $1 million on a movie that I couldn't show them the script for, that was going to employ a little green creature from outer space that I could show them a picture of. Everyone in the room thought Dowd had lost his mind. When Earl Spangler, the Hershey president, asked him if he was sure this was going to work, Dowd assured them it would. What else could I say? I had already signed up for it. In a few weeks, Universal sent Dowd a photo of the creature and the little boy to use on the promotional material. I showed the picture at a staff meeting, Spangler said. That is the ugliest creature I have ever seen, Dowd said. Dowd said nothing as the room burst into laughter, but silently he began to worry. My entire career was going to come down to this little alien, he realized. Hershey launched one of the biggest public relations offenses for a single brand in the company's history. One plant worked overtime for 2 months to get enough candy ready to support the campaign. Reese's Pieces, never before sold in cinemas, suddenly popped up in display cases of 600 theaters scheduled to premiere the movie. On the night of the film's opening in Hollywood, there was a special showing at the Hershey Motor Lodge Theater. Everyone who had worked on the project came to watch the film. Dowd sat in the back holding his breath. When the movie was over, nobody said a word. Then the room burst into applause. Dowd ran out to the lobby to watch the faces of the crowd leave the theater. Many of them were tear-stained. The movie E.T. set all-time box office records. Sales of Reese's Pieces took off like wildfire, tripling within 2 weeks of the film's release. It was the biggest marketing coup in Hershey Company history. After the unrivaled publicity surrounding the Reese's placement, word quickly spread that Mars had been offered the movie deal and had turned it down. One possible reason was that the company had changed leadership. In 1973, Forrest Mars turned the ownership of Mars Incorporated over to his children, Forrest Jr., John, and Jacqueline. The three share the management responsibility of their huge company. They work 10-hour days, 7 days a week, rarely take vacations, and almost always clock in before dawn. Like their father, the younger Marses passed up promising acquisitions. "We don't buy and sell businesses," insists John. "We build." Over the long run is a strategy that has cost them businesses in the United States, but it has also made them a huge global company. Since 1973, Mars has grown from sales of $800 million to a whopping $30 billion in 2007. They have expanded the business around the globe to markets in Beijing and Sydney. Today, Mars is much more than candy. It makes the premium ice cream Dove Bar and the nation's leading rice, Uncle Ben's, and scores of other products. In Australia, Mars is the largest producer of spices and sauces. In Italy, the company distributes fresh pasta and pizza. On a global basis, Mars sells about as much pet food as it does candy and snacks. Today, Mars is bigger than such corporate giants as McDonald's and Kellogg, and 4 times the size of its rival Hershey Foods. While his children ran his empire, Forrest Sr. remained active. In 1980, bored with retired life, he invited some of his old colleagues to join him in building another candy company. After his mother, the new factory located in Las Vegas makes liquor-filled chocolates. Forrest Mars ran Ethel M. the way he ran all of his other businesses until recently. He lived in a penthouse above the factory and kept tabs on his workers through one-way mirrors. Employees called him the Phantom of the Candy Factory. Today, much has changed in Hershey, Pennsylvania. The mansion Milton Hershey donated to the country club now contains the offices of the Hershey Trust, which serves as the trustee for the Milton Hershey School Trust Fund. The magnificent community center has also been taken over by corporate offices. a commercial Disneyland-style amusement park, has supplanted the open park of yesteryear. Now, instead of candy plant tours, visitors are directed to a place called Chocolate World, a free ride through a simulation of a candy making process. What else has changed is that the once sleepy Hershey has learned to respond to the competitive realities of today's marketplace. With the acquisition of other candy companies in the late 1980s, Hershey can now boast of having 9 of the top 20 candy brands in the United States. Some things have not changed in Hershey, however. When his wife died, Milton said he wanted to do something extraordinary in her memory. His thoughts naturally turned to the Hershey Industrial School. In an astonishing gift, Hershey gave the school his entire estate, including all of his stock. Currently, the school is home to more than 1,000 students, girls as well as boys of all races and religions. Most are not orphans, but many come from broken homes in poor inner-city neighborhoods or rural areas. Today, Hershey's remarkable donation is worth more than $5 billion, making the school one of the richest private educational institutions in the United States, a legacy Kitty would have been proud of. When Milton Hershey died at 88 in 1945, his funeral brought the town and its surrounding communities to a standstill. Public schools and businesses closed, and thousands of people made a pilgrimage to the Hershey School, where the body lay in state. Hershey was laid to rest beside his wife, his father, and his mother, high atop a hill overlooking the town he built and the seat of a corporate empire that continues to this day. Great article. Now you've got the background for Hershey and Mars. Okay, I'm going to read a few more minutes where we left off from the Survey of Criminal Law. Here we go. When a person fails to act reasonably and unintelligibly and injures another, that person is responsible for a negligent tort. Automobile accidents and medical malpractice are examples of negligent torts. When a person injures another intentionally, an intentional tort has occurred. Many intentional torts are also crimes, and this is an area where civil law and criminal law have much in common. If at that fraternity party you make a partier angry, and as a result he intentionally strikes you with the bottle, then he has committed both a crime and an intentional tort. While criminal law may impose a jail sentence or other punitive measures, tort law normally seeks only to compensate you for your injury. So if you suffered $10,000 in medical bills to repair your broken nose, you would be entitled to that amount, but the partier cannot be sentenced to jail or otherwise be punished within the tort or civil tort action. A separate criminal charge may be filed by the government. The final type of tort is a strict liability tort. In these situations, liability exists even though the tortfeasor has acted with extreme caution and intended to cause no harm. As an example is a strict liability tort, or an example of a strict liability tort is blasting. Whenever a mining company or demolition company uses blasting, it is liable for any injuries or damages it has caused to property, even if the company exercised extreme caution. Damages that are awarded or won in a lawsuit and compensate a party for actual loss are compensatory damages. Compensatory damages do just what the name states, compensate the injured party. However, another type of damage exists, punitive damages. Contrary to what you have learned so far, punitive damages are awarded in civil suits and are intended to prevent undesirable behavior by punishing those who commit outrageous acts. Punitive damages are also and often requested by plaintiffs in lawsuits, but are rarely awarded. Don't worry if the idea of punitive damages confuses you, because it appears to be a criminal law concept, but it isn't. In fact, many lawyers argue that punitive should not be allowed because a person can end up punished twice, once when convicted and sentenced by a criminal court, and again by a civil court if punitives are awarded. Yet punitive damages have been upheld in most instances by the Supreme Court. A note of caution: do not get the concept of punitive damages mixed up with restitution or fines. Finally, a few other differences between criminal law and civil law should be mentioned. First, in civil law, the person who brings the lawsuit or the plaintiff is the person who was injured. Let's use an example. You go to the Piggly Wiggly grocery store to do your shopping and request the assistance of a checkout person who recently was divorced from a spouse who looks very much like you. The checker immediately becomes enraged and vents all of his anger for his ex-wife on you by striking you with the box of Captain Crunch, which he was checking. He has committed a possible assault and battery with both tort law, these are intentional torts, and criminal law. However, in tort law, you must sue the checker yourself to recover any losses you may suffer. This is not true in criminal law. The government, whether national, state, or local, is always the party who files criminal charges. Often you will hear people say that they have filed criminal charges against someone. This is not true. What they have usually done is file a complaint, and the government has determined whether criminal charges are to be filed. This is true because a violation of criminal law is characterized as an attack on the citizens of a state or the federal government, and as such, a violation of public, not private law. Since it is public, the decision to file or not file is made by a public official, the prosecutor. So in the example above, you have to contact either the police or your local prosecutor to have a criminal action brought against the checker. In civil cases, the case is entitled Citizen versus Citizen, and in criminal law, it is government, for example, the state of Montana versus the citizen. In some jurisdictions, criminal actions are brought under the name of the people. This is done in New York, and criminal cases filed there are entitled The People of the State of New York versus the Citizen. Okay, that concludes our jury charge for the 200 class.